Play at Novibet.
Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of the Irish Angle on Jump To It. As usual, I've Emma Nagle and Johnny Ward here, and we are again sponsored by Novibet, who, if you bet 10, you can get 50 in free bets. And if you need it, free bets 50 is the bonus code if you want to ever open an account with them. Anyway, let's move on. We've got some big things to discuss here. The first one being a major revelation came out last week that trainer Luke Comer has got a 3-year suspension of his license and a load of fines and money to pay back over the costs of the whole hearing, which went on for a long time and cost an absolute fortune. The first thing is this was over 12 horses that were tested and proved to be positive for anabolic steroids, which are performance enhancing. So this is the big one. This is the one that we've had alarm bells ringing in the industry for years, with Paul Kimmage and Jim Bulger saying that this is rife within the sport and everything else. So finally, here we are. We found 12 horses that have anabolic steroids. So what does racing do about it? We couldn't find out where it came from. After all the money they spent, all the time and effort that went into this, we still don't know where the anabolic steroids actually came from or how they got into the horse's system. And at the end of it, a man who spends 9 months of the year outside Ireland has had his license suspended for 3 years. I don't think he actually trains the horses personally. How can he when he's only here for 3 months of the year and he's loads of other business interests? Is this a satisfactory conclusion, Johnny?
No, it isn't really, Vinny. And, this is a kind of a unique case. I wrote about it in the Currency on Saturday, and it's kind of a lot. I suppose I took a lot from the IHRB report because there was a lot in it. But like I would have met Luke Comer once or twice, and I'm a Galway United fan, and he's been hugely beneficial to Galway United, giving loads of money to Galway United. And I've always found his training operation pretty bizarre because of sort of the stallions he uses, really left field stallions, horses that I'd never have heard of or didn't race and stuff like that. And sending horses he trained himself to stud, even when they were rated about 50 at the end of it all and stuff like that. And I've always been conscious of the fact that with the resources that he has, he could actually pretty much nearly take on Coolmore with the money he has. Like, he's so much money and he is investing a lot in the operation. But it does kind of beg the question, if you're basically a tax exile, he lives out of the country for 9 months of the year, how can you actually be a licensed trainer? And how can your name be on the race card if and Luke Coleman would have runners every month now, pretty much going into Dundalk into the flat season. He's quite a lot of runners last season, two seasons, maybe 3 seasons. How can you be the licensed trainer? And I think the IHRB sort of mentioned, maybe alluded to that in the report. But basically it said at the end, listen, after all of this, we don't really know, and we can't prove how the drugs got in. And, maybe it's not that straightforward to prove how they got in, but Luke, you're very well off. We're going to fine you a nominal amount. You're going to pay our legal fees. And seeing as though you don't train anyway, it doesn't really make any difference. So I agree with you. It's not a satisfactory outcome in some respects. The only people really laughing all the way to the bank are the people who work in the law, because the IHRB's what they had to pay their lawyers, what Luke is going to have to pay is absolutely staggering money. But the whole thing is a bit bizarre. And some of the stuff that came out of the report, I mean, Luke doesn't have many owners apart from himself. And I'm not sure I'd want to send a horse to a yard where if my horse was of a certain ability, he'd be getting inferior hay as opposed to better hay, which was something that Jim Gorman explained in the report. Very strange one for me. I personally don't believe Luke Comer had anything to do with this. Which begs the question, why is he down as a licensed trainer?
Yeah, I agree largely to that. That was the one, Emma, I want to ask you about that. Besides what your opinion is on, has racing done the right thing here in the sanctions it has imposed and what it has done with the whole investigation? But what about that with hay? Is that what happens in your yard with your dad? Do the good horses get better hay than the other ones?
No, you'd like to think that doesn't happen too often, to be honest. It was kind of a strange excuse. And like Johnny said, it's just kind of a very strange case overall. I mean, it's a great point there being made about, if the man is in the country 3 months a year, how can he be really licensed to train horses? Because, I mean, unless he's a very, very seasonal, has very, very seasonal runners, it just wouldn't really be possible, really. I know Jim Gorman, like you mentioned, he's, I think, assistant trainer in the yard. And I think Luke's son is involved as well a bit. But yeah, it kind of begs the question, how can he be really a licensed trainer when he's not really spending a very small portion of his time in the country? And just the whole entire thing, I mean, when it came out, I was very, very surprised, because kind of like what was kind of said there, I mean, Luke Comer is kind of operating on a very, very not a small level, I suppose. He has a lot of runners. I think he had over 200 runners this year or last year, and he's operating at a 3% strike rate. But like I would have always just assumed that, you know, Luke Homer is obviously a billionaire businessman. I thought, you know, maybe he'd have the horses just as a bit of sport. He's obviously not making any kind of living out of the game. Maybe others in the yard are obviously making a living out of it, but it would beg the question of why would Luke Homer be injecting his horses with any kind of steroids, considering it's probably just some kind of a hobby for him, just to have some kind of interest in racing. So it was just a very, very bizarre one. And, you know, he put a lot of resources into disputing the case with the IHRB. I think there's a lot of different testimonies from different people kind of suggesting where the contamination may have come from, but there was no kind of conclusive decision as to how these 12 horses came into contact with the steroids. So, I mean, I think the 3 years definitely isn't satisfactory. Kind of coming back to your own question, you know, for the level of 12 horses testing positive for anabolic steroids is quite a serious outcome. I think I saw Darragh O'Loughlin from the IHRB on Sunday at the weekend, and he was kind of saying that they couldn't really conclusively prove that Luke Homer or anyone in the yard had injected the horses with the steroids. So that's kind of reflected in the 3-year ban. But yeah, I don't think it's really a punishment to fit the crime. And I know he got a big fine, but I mean that would be kind of pocket money to a fella like him, I'd say.
Yeah, 80 grand fine. That'd be the equivalent to me or you getting a fiver, I'd say. So like the fine was irrelevant. The cost's okay. He's if you take it that they're saying he threw a bucket load of money at this, which he obviously did to try and disprove their case, and to try and prove that that it was through the hay that the horses were fed was where the contamination came from. That he probably spent a lot more than they did on this case. He may have spent millions plus on this with all his legal team and everything else that he had involved. Their costs looked like they were in excess of $1 million as well. He's paying $750,000, which is 80% of their costs. So we're looking at several million euro was spent around this whole thing, and at the end of it, we still have no idea where those steroids came from. Seems astonishing to me. I don't know. Look, this is the game all over, isn't it? It seems impossible to prove anything in this game. And then one of the things that we had from the IHRB, which really got my back up a little bit, was that they were accusing him of not having proper surveillance cameras in place. Like they're the biggest culprits in this whole area, because we had the previous cases going back, like some very high profile cases with Ted Walsh and with Charles Burns, where cameras in stable yards were the big problem. They didn't exist. They were given money to put them in. They spent the money on something else. So like, I don't know. You just wonder.
It's interesting as well, Vinny, that if you compare, I was on to Ronan McNally the day after. I think even in our WhatsApp group, one of you might have said, I wonder what Ronan McNally thinks of this. It's interesting, the comparison here, because you've doping on one level and you've sort of inside information and landing gambles, for want of a better word, on the other level, and the punishment is very, very different here. Like, and I do kind of believe that the IHRB, as Darragh would have said, couldn't really, you're guilty, but at the same time, you're guilty more. A bit like Charles Burns in the Viking Horde case. We can't prove what happened here, but ultimately the book stops with you, so you kind of have to look after what happens. But anecdotally, Luke Homer's yard wouldn't have been the most straightforward one place in the world. Again, as befits a trainer who's not there for 3/4 of the year, not to mind in the yard. And anecdotally, I'd say he might have struggled to get top-class staff. And I wouldn't think it was 1,000,000 to 1 that this was done out of spite by a disgruntled employee or something like that. I'm completely speculating, but who knows? I do wonder, though, like, Luke's an interesting study into the good and bad of capitalism, I suppose, and that he basically came from nothing. He worked his way to the top. He now has so much money that he can basically pay all these lawyers about 800 grand and get nowhere in the end. Basically, they got, like, he didn't get anywhere. If he just accepted his punishment, said, I don't know what happened here, and avoided all that legal costs. So I don't know. It's a strange case, but I suppose there should be reputational damage to the trainer. But in this instance, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, the other thing here as well is, look, there's two major issues within the sport. One is drugs, and the other one is this gambling or laying horses to lose or whatever and all the rest of it, right? They're the two big ones that, if you look at the McNally case, it's all about the gambling, and the laying horses to lose is one element of that too. The same with the Charles Burns case with Viking Horde, and all the way through this, it's either one or the other generally, or both in some cases, I suppose. But we don't seem to be able to, as a sport, regulate or sort out what the problem is in either case. Because like you've got a Dennis Hogan claimer from Dundalk as well. We're into our 4th year now, are we? Those horses don't even exist anymore, not even in training, as far as I know, and yet the case still rumbles on in the background if it'll ever be heard. I don't know what's gone on there, but that seemed like a simple issue where you had 2 horses in one stable, one gets backed, the other drifts in the betting, and the one who gets backed wins. And there was an investigation into it, and it's gone on forever. This one here, like if we had to get to the bottom of what actually happened in Luke Comer's, we could be here for another 20 years and still never get to the bottom of what really went on. So it seems very frustrating.
I don't think drugs are a big issue, though, Vinny. I really don't. I think the issues are funding the sport and affordability checks, and people actually gambling on horses and keeping this thing afloat, and the government supporting it rather than like the drug issue itself. I don't see any proof that drugs are a big issue. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know what Emma thinks, but to me, there's no proof of what Jim Bulger said whatsoever. So I don't know what the answer is here. The Luke Comer story in racing, I'd say, doesn't even get that much comment because it's not. To me, it's not that big of a deal. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, okay, well, look, I'm not so sure about all of that, because the big issue here is, right, that horse, the horse that started this whole ball rolling with Luke Comer finished 4th in a listed race, right? And they did a hair follicle test. There's very few hair follicle tests done at the races. It's mainly urine samples. If they'd have done a urine sample on that horse, we wouldn't know anything about any of this at all, because it wouldn't show up. If the horse is given anabolic steroids, it's out of their system within days, if not weeks. So if the horse had been given it several weeks earlier, we wouldn't have known. He'd have finished 4th in his listed race up in Leopardstown, and we all move on. Normally, anyway, a horse finishing 4th in a race doesn't even get tested. It's only winners. So what leaky sieve are we dealing with here? Like, as I say, I put it in my blog this week about the amount of urine samples taken from winners. Every winner is sampled at the races, right? There's tests sent off, but it's almost exclusively urine samples. I think what happens is, if for some reason they can't get the urine sample, they take a blood sample, and in very rare cases it seems to be a hair follicle test.
Why not more hair?
That's what I wonder. Why not? Like, let's say we say, okay, hang on a minute here. We're after spending millions. The industry, it's cost them millions. There's all the bad look of this. We've got 12 horses with testing positive anabolic steroids. Let's say, right, for the next year, forget about the urine for the next year, and we're just going to go hair follicle every single winner. Let's see how many turn up then. That's the answer, is it not? Is that not an answer to at least see what the problem is? Because we have no idea what the size of the problem is here.
In theory, a hair sample can go back to the horse's birth effectively. So that's my understanding. I remember talking to Michael O'Donoghue about this a few years ago. Michael's, I think, retired now from the Turf Club, the old HRB. But I'll have to be honest now, I don't know the extent of the hair sampling, but it's interesting to say that I would have assumed, well, if Luke Comer were done 2 years ago, this is relatively common.
No, is the answer. It's not. There were, I haven't got the figures off the top of my head here, but we're talking about 2.5 in the year that horse was had the positive test. There were 2,600 odd urine samples. There was 700 odd blood samples, and only 300 odd hair samples taken at the races. The other thing is, when the IHRB do an out of competition test, and they go to a training establishment or a stud farm or wherever it is they go, and they test horses, they don't do urine at all. They only do blood and hair. So why is that? Emma, you any idea?
I just know from my own experience, if you lead up a horse and it wins, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a hair sample being taken. Like you mentioned, they're a little bit less common. Like they'll try and get the horse to urinate, and if not, they'll take a blood sample. But why they don't take the urine samples at the yard, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's harder to get them to urinate kind of on command, I suppose. After the race, they might be more inclined to go. But yeah, you imagine. I'm not sure why hair testing isn't more common. Maybe it's a cost thing. Is it more expensive to be testing hair samples rather than blood and urine? But yeah, I was reading a small bit into just the whole thing, and like you were saying, the hair can go back an awful lot further. So you'd imagine, if the hair sampling was more widespread, there might be more confidence in the kind of claims that Irish racing will be drug-free, or UK racing, or just kind of worldwide racing in general, I suppose. The blood and hair might be the blood and urine mightn't be as accurate as you'd hope to kind of keep the sport totally clean.
Yeah, I think, and like you look at even the urine samples, right? There are cases every single day of a trainer running some horse on medication that hadn't got out of its system because of the urine, because we know that there are certain withdrawal periods for all the different medications that horses are given. Legal medications they're given when they're by veterinary surgeons and everything else. But yet you have to give a withdrawal period of 10 days for some, 20 days for others, 30 days for others, and everything else. And there's a huge amount of offences there in that area alone. Never mind the anabolic steroids, which cannot be detected realistically with the urine test at the races each day with every winner that's going through. So I think the system is flawed personally, and I think that this is what others have been saying for years. I don't know what the extent of the problem is, but obviously there's a problem. We proved it here when a random blood test or a random hair follicle test shows up a positive. They go to the yard, they find 11 more with the exact same anabolic steroids in their system. So obviously it's more widespread, I would have thought, than just Luke Comer's yard.
I'm going to have a look into that now, because what you're almost implying there is that the IHRB is afraid to do kind of carte blanche hair testing.
Not necessarily. I'm not saying it's afraid to. I don't know what the reasoning behind it is. I presume
cost shouldn't be relevant. Like
no, but presumably it is. That's what I'm presuming is the issue.
Say if the Irish racing authorities are afraid that, like, well, if you go back as far as like the breeze ups and you go back far enough where there's a lot of money involved, and oh God, like if we start kind of doing hair sampling at big yards, what could happen in the sense that we don't know when this, if we find something, we don't know when it was actually in the system and all that. That's a very loaded issue, but it's certainly worth looking into. No. I have to say, day to day, I don't do that much racing news anymore, so I'm kind of absolving myself responsibility here. But when I was working day to day, I was far more into this. But maybe it's something that I will look into, because
in fairness to the IHRB, every time they go to an out of competition testing, when they call to a yard, all they do is hair and blood. They don't do the urine at all. So like, it's not as if they're afraid to do it or they don't want to see this happening. They're well able to do it when it's out of a racecourse situation. I'm not sure what the logistics are of doing it at a racecourse. I have no idea how they do this. I'm presuming you just pull a hair out of a horse and you put it in a jar and you send it off somewhere. Maybe it's a lot more complicated than that. I really don't know.
Can I ask Emma though, like, Emma, is there any suggestion in like, I don't get any feeling that drugs is even discussed as being an issue in racing. Like, it's not. There's a lot of things where it's like there's a bit of a hush and an elbow and a wink in terms of the gambling aspect of racing, but I don't feel day to day from talking to trainers, I don't feel that drugs is it. Apart from Jim Bulger bringing it up, nobody seems to bring it up to me. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, it's not really kind of a widespread topic, I suppose, among people in racing. I suppose like when Jim Bulger came out with it, I think everyone was just kind of wondering who was he talking about. You kind of needed more details on it. But yeah, I mean, look, I suppose in any sport there's people who are going to be trying to gain an advantage and cheating like that. But I think without concrete evidence, it's very hard to just speculate that Irish racing is widespread with drugs. Look, maybe more concrete testing, like in hair testing, might bring more confidence. I know it's kind of something, there's always whispers on social media talking about it, but I think just among people in racing, I don't think it's seen as that massive an issue, to be honest.
Well, the other issue, like, look at that, right? You say about that, the drugs is rarely talked about and everything else, but the other thing is jockeys stopping horses. That's rarely talked about either, and it happens every day. And you say, jockeys stopping horses. That happens every day in racing, as far as I'm concerned. I can see it. Others can see it. The odd one gets pulled in, but you never hear a jockey talking about it. All you read in the media or you see on TV and everything is every race we watch. Gosh, didn't he give that a great ride? Wasn't that a fantastic ride the winner gave that? Oh, what a fantastic jockey he is. But what about the other 20 in behind him who, some of them, didn't actually try in that race? And that's happening every day. There are jockeys out there, as we know, in this sport. This is no secret, but there are jockeys out there, journeyman jockeys, who've been around for 20 years. They rarely ride a winner. All they're brought in for is for the 6 days when the horse isn't trying, and then when you've got the big day, then the big jockey sits up and goes and wins. That's happening all over the place. It's happened since the beginning of time, and yet we don't talk about that at all either. So maybe the drugs is the same. I just don't know.
Do you have an issue with that, Vinny?
With them stopping horses, of course I do.
Yeah.
Because I back horses. So from backing horses, you need to be, the only way you can do this from my point of view, there's only two ways of doing this. You either do it through inside information, which some of the very successful people do. I try to do it the straight way, which is studying the form.
Okay.
But you only get so far.
So say you're a prospective owner, right? And you go to a trainer and he or she says to you, okay, I've had a look at this horse. I'd say it's a flat horse, right? I'd say its ceiling would be 65 or 70, give or take. Do you want me to run the horse 100% fit over its optimum trip on its optimum ground in maidens, or do you want me to get it handicapped?
Okay. And fair enough, I would say get it handicapped. In the same way, if you said to me, you're the same trainer, and you come to me and say, listen, this horse is about a 55, but if I inject him with this, he'd be a 95, and he could be winning you big races at Cheltenham next March. Go ahead, doesn't bother me.
Trainer, I'll be there.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Like, so it's the flip side of the same coin here, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think there's a benign sort of bending of the rules that has basically gone on from the start of racing. I mean, if the handicapping system itself is based on the fact that you have a better chance of winning getting the mark lower, and I don't really have a problem with that. I think it's part of the game. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everything should be 100% clean. And I think a bit of benign bending of the rules, like life itself. Sometimes I jaywalk. Drugs are another issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We'll move on anyway because we're not going to solve it. But the bottom line is, I think this proves that Jim Bulger, Kimmage, and the rest of them, they're not onto nothing here. It's not a dead end they were going. There is something there. We're after proving it now, or we've proved it by default.
He wasn't on about Luke Homer, though.
No, I'm sure they weren't talking about Luke Homer, but at the same time, if Luke Homer's yard or someone in his yard or someone associated somewhere, whether that be a disgruntled ex-employee or whatever, is able to get their hands on these anabolic steroids, well, surely others are too. Like this, it can't be a once-off incident. That's in my opinion anyway. And then the other side of it is, it may not be a disgruntled employee. It could be someone who's gambling on horses saying, geez, if we inject Luke Homers, they're going to be 300 to 1 in the race. We can make a few quid here by getting them to improve 3 or 4 stone from one run to the other. So
it's feasible.
Well, look at it. Gambling is a huge part of the sport, isn't it? So, like, if there's an advantage to be had, someone will find that advantage. That's the bottom line.
I think what you're getting at there is more dangerous on the other side, when you can basically stop a horse by injecting the horse with something to basically stop him, and that's something I think is that like you can make serious money laying horses doing that affects you no chance. What happened with Viking Horde? Who knows? But I'd be definitely worried about that as well.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, look, we'll move on. One other thing I just wanted to have a quick chat with you about, because it's always in the back of my mind, but it really cropped up for me over the weekend. I was over in the UK for a couple of days, and I looked at the Times newspaper on Saturday. A big tome with hundreds of pages in it and everything else, and a huge sports section. They had 12 pages on rugby. They had 1.5 pages on horse racing, which just was very basic. Carried some very small print race cards for the 5 meetings in the UK on Saturday, carried the results for the UK meetings on the Friday. Not a single mention of Irish racing anywhere in it. And then there was even a 2-page big spread on Tony Bloom, who owns Brighton Football Club. He's also a major owner, as far as I'd be concerned, with horses like Stratham and Penn Hill, winning at Royal Ascot, Cheltenham Festival. He's horses with Willie Mullins. He's horses with Neil Mulholland. Not a single word about horse racing in his whole piece. It was all about poker. It was all about soccer and his ownership and buying and selling of players and everything else. Then I come home from the UK. I watched the 9 o'clock news last night on RTE. Their sports bulletin covered a myriad of sports, everything from cycling to the rugby, obviously, and all sorts of other things covered across the country in every area. And not one single mention of horse racing. And it may not be the biggest day in horse racing yesterday, but we did at the start of the 7-day harvest festival in the Stole. It'd be a traditional thing you think might have got a mention. Certainly the ploughing will get a mention when that's on. But yes, the harvest festival doesn't get a mention. Has racing got a problem going forward, Emma, trying to keep its profile up there?
I mean, yeah, it's obviously a bit of a worry, like you mentioned, when they're mentioning kind of all kinds of sports. You wouldn't mind if it was just competing with maybe the football, or if there was big boxing or something, racing might always get a mention. But you think with something kind of major-ish, like the Listowel Festival started yesterday, you think it would get some kind of a mention. And, it's kind of a thing, I suppose, you can kind of look at it both ways. I think racing in England and Ireland is probably losing a following. I suppose years ago, maybe it was kind of more of a centre of people's, centre of sport, I suppose. You see even like race course attendances would kind of attest to that racing probably is losing popularity a bit. People probably just don't have as much interest in hearing about the day-to-day mundane kind of boring parts of it. Unfortunately, stuff like the Luke Comer news and the likes of the Ronan McNally sentencing will always make it into the big media, which probably isn't helping the sport's reputation a bit, I suppose, when those kind of things are being reported, and smaller stuff probably isn't. Yeah, it's definitely a worry, and it's kind of hard to know what it's going to be like going forward. Will it get smaller, or it's kind of encouraging, I suppose. This week now, TG Cahill will be covering the Listowel racing, and it'll be on kind of terrestrial TV. People will get to watch it. Bit disappointing, I suppose. They'll be competing with the ploughing on Wednesday, but you'd hope there'll still be a big crowd down in Listowel. But what it does going forward, like, I mean, I suppose we've seen in England, like, it's the kind of backlash to racing, I suppose, in certain ways, like at the protests at the Grand National and at the Derby. Maybe is it even slightly a better thing that racing is staying out of the mainstream media? Does it want to draw more attention to those people who might not really take much notice of it otherwise? It kind of seems like Animal Rising has forgotten about racing for a while. It might not do any harm to kind of keep them off the backs for a while, but just in terms, I suppose, of drawing more attention to the day-to-day stuff, yeah, it's definitely a worry, and it's probably not going to pick up a whole pile. Like, as I said, it's probably a sport that's maybe losing popularity, which is a bit unfortunate.
Yeah. What do you think, Johnny?
I wouldn't be worried about that, because I think newspapers are becoming practically irrelevant, really. And from a League of Ireland perspective, there's always this hysteria about, like, oh, what are RTE doing? What games are on TV? When basically the League of Ireland is thriving because of social media and other issues. So I think racing needs to target younger people, really. It needs to get kids to yards, but 100% needs to introduce kids to horses. Half of them are going to fall in love straight away, and needs to target people on social media, and that's free. And, like, even I still think racing is missing a lot of tricks. I love newspapers, and I still buy newspapers, but I wouldn't worry about what's in newspapers relative to racing. I think because social media is kind of where it's at now, whether you like it or not, and websites, and there's still plenty of stuff online about racing. I still think, like, racing missing a trick. Like, if you look at the drone coverage that they had of Laytown, phenomenal. Like, the drone coverage of racing is brilliant. And if we can use HD properly to advertise how utterly stunning these racehorses are, stuff like that, and really, even on TV and on social media, just put racing in a favourable light. I still think people like going racing. I still think most people like to, or a lot of people like to have a bet. Young people like to have a bet. If you bring young people to the races, they enjoy themselves. So I think the traditional media, it's a bit like the League of Ireland. It really wouldn't worry me that much. But I think racing needs to target young people, get them to yards, and get them racing.
Yeah, but what age are you talking about here in young people? Are you talking about children, or are you talking about young adults?
Young adults, definitely, in terms of, like, I suppose, anecdote. I mean, I was having a coffee this morning, and I saw a child on his or her, I don't know which it was, on the phone. The child could barely walk, and I mean that, because I saw the mother with the child, and I was like, Jesus. So the kids are indoctrinated earlier on their phones, but certainly I'd bring I'd be trying to get yards, and an orchestrated attempt to get yards, to get school children to go out to yards and visit the horses. In terms of racing itself, try to target, like, college societies to get, like, Emma would relate to this, and I can relate to it. Back in the day, I saw Back in Front winning for his Supreme Novice Hurdle win at Limerick, and that was a college day. Get the student days going, get college days going, get young people to go racing that are in college, for example, and get school children to go out to visit yards that has nothing to do with gambling.
Okay, yeah, that's the one thing for me, is just the going to the yards thing. That's to try and get them interested in the horse itself rather than in the horse racing. So it's kind of a different thing, is it, to some extent?
Well, it's a racehorse. Like, so, I mean, if you want to get into horses, are horses. Like, I think if you bring out, I mean, Gordon Elliott's yard visit there, I don't know who was at that, was phenomenally successful. If HRI started organising school tours around horse racing yards for kids, like, say in national school, for example, the ages of 10 to 12, it would be phenomenally successful. Like, I'm still a child when I go to a yard and start petting a horse and seeing the beauty of them. I don't think that's done nearly enough. Like, and I know, I can see my one of my nieces now. She's mad to start riding horses, even though she's no racing background. And it's a natural extension in that. And then we might get future staff in racing that want to work in the yards and that. I think it's a no-brainer, to be honest.
Yeah, I think HRI have actually started kind of new initiative there this year with Danny Mullins. I think it's kind of I think school teachers can kind of take it up, and there's kind of a video series. And I think Danny will go to the yard with some horse. I think it's a retired racehorse. I'm not sure who he brings, and like that's all great. I mean, it'll get kids kind of more interested in it. Without, I suppose, maybe bringing like 30 school kids to a yard might be a bit hard to organise. So it's probably an easier way of doing it, but yeah, no, that's like it's definitely getting people down to the places like gardens and stuff is going to help massively, because I think you just kind of feel more involved in the sport as well, because it maybe can seem a bit secular from the outside, but I don't know, if you can get into yards and kind of see around, it's definitely going to help interest for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I suppose you can get more hands-on in that whole thing, I suppose, bringing Danny and the horse to the school, perhaps. Because certainly at a race meeting, you're kept at arm's length or a lot further away from the actual horses, the action, everything else. It's only for those in the inner circle who can go into the parade ring and all those different places at the track. So yeah, I can see that working somehow. Okay, well, moving on to real racing. Let's look at Doncaster last week. Doncaster St. Ledger, continuous. Aidan O'Brien now 10-1 for the Arc. Did you watch Doncaster, Emma?
Yeah, I thought he was very, very impressive, to be honest. I think it was Aidan's 7th Ledger, and I think it's just highlighting the success that Ballydoyle have had with Japanese sires. I think from a fairly small sample size, they've done very well in classics with them. I think like Augusta Rodan this year, Continuous, Saxon Warrior, Snowfall, they've all done very well. So it's maybe something that they'd expand more and more with the Japanese sires. But I just thought he was brilliant. I thought Ryan probably rode him as if he was the best horse in the race. I thought for a second maybe he might have a bit of trouble with a gap, but he was probably just going so easily. All the gaps were just opening for him. Stayed out the trip very, very well, stepping up from New York. Like where he go next, I think Aidan kind of mentioned the Arc. It would be interesting to see him going there. Kind of just as a horse, he's just very likable. I think probably the way things go now with St. Ledger horse is more likely to be a national hunt sire than a flat sire. But just like if he did go to the national hunt, he'd be such a desirable kind of stallion prospect. You'd think he just seems so straightforward, great attitude, and obviously very talented to match. So yeah, another very good 3-year-old for the Ballydoyle team. But yeah, no, I was very impressed by the performance.
And the death of Galileo hasn't really affected Ballydoyle, has it? Like, they just seem to be getting stronger and stronger. Maybe it's because they're going to different sources. What do you think? Johnny's having a great year, Aidan O'Brien, isn't he?
Yeah, I found, to be honest, I think the death of Galileo has made the whole thing a little bit more interesting, and they've had to kind of obviously go for other stallions, but like they've come across they've fallen on a hell of a lot of stallions this year already. Like Paddington's obviously a sire in waiting, Augusta Rodan's a sire in waiting, even maybe the likes of River Tiber. And in terms of Continuous's future, like they have to run him in the Arc 100%. He's the son of Sunday Silence, who's obviously this outstanding line in Japan. That he would have been the sire Deep Impact, and you have all these really good middle distance horses and stallions in Japan. And he's also he's out of a Galileo mare as well, Continuous. And just looking at his form, he was relatively precocious in that he ran a couple of times as a 2-year-old. I have to say, I didn't take an awful lot of notice of the horse last year, but he did win its own clue. He after winning his maiden when well fancied Curragh. So he's not only very good, but he's precocious. And the fact that he won the Ledger, to me, shouldn't really influence his stallion prospects necessarily, because if he goes to the Arc, I mean, if you win over 1.6 miles, that doesn't mean you're slow. Like it means that he travels very well in his races. So for me, even though he has to be supplemented, they 100% will go for the Arc, because they don't have a certain winner of the race. It goes to Rodan and be kind of ground reliant, and then maybe Save the Last Dance and be sort of ground reliant as well. But she probably wouldn't be good enough. Whereas this lad, the way he travels, getting the 3-year-old allowance, there must be every chance of soft ground. 100% they have to go for the Arc. So I think 10-1 is a good bet. And also the fact that he becomes a really interesting stallion prospect, because Deep Impact, there's no access to him here really. So if you could get a son of Sunday Silence, who's basically an Arc winner, and it's probably going to go off single figures on the day, he becomes a fascinating stallion prospect. And I know he has Galileo on the downside, so that'll influence where he goes going forward. But he'd become a very, very desirable stallion if he wins the Arc. And I for one, think he's worth the bet. I think there might have been 12-1, but even 10-1 available, I think, is well worth the bet each way.
Good stuff. All right, we're going to look on for more bets now. Kerry National on Wednesday. 18 runners, 3 reserves. I was just looking at it there. Only 3 of the horses in the race have run in it before, which I thought was a bit unusual for a race of that stature and magnitude of prize money, a couple of $100,000 in prize money and everything else. It's always a great race. What do you make of it, Emma? What do you think will win it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant field. Like, I suppose, kind of as you often get, I think it's 120,000 to the winner, so it's always going to attract some pretty good horses to it. I suppose at the top of the weights, Ashtree Meadow kind of coming back to try and do what you nearly did last year, I suppose, coming from Galway up, I think, 10 pounds in the weights. Probably be hard for him, you'd imagine. He probably won't get it as easy as he got it in Galway as well. I'm imagining I'm going to be tipping a horse similar to Johnny. I know he's expressed he's liking for him in the past, but I think Salvatore Ziggy is very, very interesting coming into, to be honest.
Double penalty, Emma.
Yeah, I know, but he's unbeaten since changing to fences, and he just looks such like he was a good hurdler, I think, in the high 140s, competing off that mark fairly well. But I just think, looking at his profile coming into this on the back of 3 novice wins, probably one in the field that can keep improving to, I know Johnny mentioned RSA, I think, from maybe that kind of level. But I mean, look, you never know. He's of Gordon's first string. I think Jack was declared to ride him this morning. Gordon, I think, touted this as the possible target after he won in Clarny that day. So I think Jack was saying the further he went, the better he was getting. So everything kind of points to this being kind of the perfect race for him. Not sure what kind of price he'll be now. We only got the declarations up this morning. He's won at Listowel before. I think he won his bumper on Kerry National Day for his previous trainer. So I just think there's everything going from, look, he's probably high in the weights, but he could be one who could be maybe above this grade. And so, yeah, I think I'd be backing him.
Interesting. Johnny, what do you make of it?
Everything that Emma said basically there, and just I don't know what Novi bet is going to come up in terms of what price will be a Novi bet. I do see 13-2 or one bookmaker paying 5 places. Maybe you just want to back the horse win because he's likely race. But I was at Tremor, that's 2 runs back. I just couldn't get over how well this horse jumps. He might have made maybe one mistake. That was a terrible day, and ground was kind of maybe softening a bit at the same time. I was surprised that he was. We've had 2 match bets actually in Kerry in recent times, and we've won yesterday, which turned into a walkover in the end because we were faller at the last. It wasn't a walkover, but there was one finisher. And the other one we've had was when Salvatore Ziggy won at Killarney. He was sent off even second favourite. I thought he'd be favourite, but if you look, as Emma said, I actually can't even remember him winning his bumper here, but he's a brilliant jumper, and the weight wouldn't bother me, to be honest, at all. I think he's just a class act. I'd be up for higher weighted horses in these handicaps anyway, and I think he's a great bet at 32, 5 places. Jumps brilliantly well. Gordon was running him in these races to get him actually qualified for the Kerry National. I for one, think he'll be running in a Grade 1 at Cheltenham later on in the season. You look at his form at Cheltenham, the good time Johnny last year, and he was a BHB mark at 147. He's a better jumper of fence, so.
Very good. All right, I'll go against both of you, just with an each way shouting it. A Wave of the Sea. Joseph O'Brien going for 3 in a row in this race. Bit fortuitous last year, I suppose, with the fall of Hewitt, but it still goes down as Bustleton won the race. So Joseph is going for 3 in a row. This horse has finished 6th in this race the last 2 years. So you'd say, maybe he's not good enough, but it's still only a 7-year-old. So I thought that point alone, and arrives here having finished 4th in a Galway plate as well. So it comes in reasonably good form. Should be a nice price each way. So that was my tentative selection. Anyway, that's more or less it. So if you are having a bet on the Kerry National or any other races during the week, do gamble responsibly and subscribe to our channel if you get a chance, if you haven't already, so you can keep up to date on all the future videos coming through. Emma will be doing some stable tours coming soon, I'm told. So lots of stuff coming, and thanks for watching, and bye for now.